So hello world out there. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name's Juan, and welcome to the Psych Life podcast. And today we have a guest, Leslie. How are you, Leslie?
Doing very well, Juan. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. Do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself for the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born and raised in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I still live here. And I am a licensed clinical social worker and licensed clinical addictions counselor. I own a private practice in a suburb called Noblesville. And I'm also part-time clinical director of a local IOP, intensive outpatient program for treating people with addiction. And we were talking about how that's a lot of work, and it is a lot of work. And then I am married to my husband. We've been married about how long have we been married? It'll be 4 years in September, but we've been together for 6. He's in recovery, I'm in recovery. We love talking about recovery. We also have a son who is 13 and a half months, and he is amazing. And that's all I can think of right now. What else do you want to know?
That sounds like you got a lot on your plate, For some people, just being a clinical director is an all-time full-time thing. But in your case, you're not just a clinical director, you also have your own private practice. You got a husband, you got a kid. And, when people say the word, oh, I'm married, a husband or a wife, they just kind of throw it out there, right? Oh, I'm married, that, this is what it is. And that's it. But we both know, even though I'm not married, but I've been with someone for a while, that a relationship requires a lot of work. A relationship requires time. It requires effort. It requires the deconstructing of certain beliefs sometimes to be there for that person. And we're living in a society where we try to make people change to fit within our box. But true love and freedom is found by breaking down those walls and deconstructing the belief and just really caring about a person for who they are. Do you mind, this is kind of a private question, but obviously you have a lot on your plate. How do you manage the relationship with your lover or your husband that you've been together for 6 years, with everything you got going on, of course?
It's such a good question. And I love what you said about, not putting someone into a box and loving them for who they really are, because I know in my past, in my history in relationships, I would fall in love with the idea of a person or the potential that I saw in them, who I thought they could be. And I made a vow to myself after doing that too many times that I would only be with somebody if I loved them exactly as they are now when I meet them. I got wrapped up in trying to change my partners. And so with my now, that's who I met after I sort of made that vow to myself. And it's not always easy. When you talk about managing everything, we've actually been lately, if I'm being really honest, with the coronavirus and with just everything I'm doing in my work. He actually stays at home with our son, which is unconventional, and I love that about us. But he and I haven't had a date night in a while, and we make that a priority. We have made that a priority thus far. And then Corona hit, and 3 months went by and we didn't really have a date night. So, that's one of the things that I think is really important. When I start to feel disconnected from him, I'll ask for some quality time. I'll say, I really want to schedule a date night with you where it's just me and you. It's not nobody else is there. Our son, we get a babysitter, and we have time to connect.
That's kind of really cool that you guys have an open and honest relationship like that you can say, hey, I feel disconnected. Can we have some time together? And obviously the coronavirus hitting was a big change for all of us, because my date nights with my lover, my, girlfriend, had to change, and we had to get creative. And I think I do a lot, but from hearing you talk, it doesn't seem like I do nearly as much as what you got going on. Do you ever apply, because we're both therapists, do you ever apply stuff within your profession into your personal life? Or do you try splitting those up? And I'm not talking about seeing clients and stuff like that. I'm talking about the theories. Like, for example, the triangular theory of love. I used to try and see these theories and try to apply them directly to my life. And what I found is sometimes it's easy to conceptualize something, but it's a lot harder to live it. And so I just want to, and I'm, it doesn't have to be with triangular theory of love. It could be, for example, with the stages of change theory, where, obviously that theory is used a lot for addiction and recovery, but it's also used in other aspects of our life, with whatever's going on, whether it's a change of a job or, passing of a family member. Do you ever try applying what in our field, the theories, into your life?
Absolutely, I do. One of the things that I have learned through my research and experience around couples work and relationships is how important, and I think you'll recognize this, is appreciation, and how important that is in a relationship, because you were talking about 5 positive interactions for every one, and that is from John Gottman. Are you familiar with John Gottman?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. And so John Gottman, I have learned about the importance of appreciation from him. And so every once in a while, maybe 3 times a week, I'd love for it to be daily, but it's not right now, given we are very distracted by our toddler. But I will stop and I'll say, hey, Jeremy, that's my husband. And I'll say, hey, let's do appreciations. And it's funny because he will groan sometimes at that, because he's like, oh my gosh, like, you're such a therapist, but I know how important it is. And so he'll groan, but then he'll do it. And we'll both share 3 things that we appreciate about the other person, either from like recently or just in general about who they are. And that I feel like creates connection. And I didn't learn that out of thin air. I learned it from John Gottman and other theories in couples work that I've learned about.
John Gottman, he's the one who wrote the 5 love languages, right?
No, that's actually Gary Chapman.
That's right.
Yes.
And excuse me for that.
Yeah, no worries. John Gottman he has tons of books. But one of his best sellers is The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. And he talks about appreciation in that book. I think, I actually could be wrong about that. Maybe that's not where I got it from, but the 5 love languages is another great one that I apply. Have you, I'm curious about you, when you were talking about getting creative about date nights, what did you and your girlfriend do?
Well, I appreciate the question. I don't typically get some, but I've been scolded for doing stuff like that. Oh, I'm not your client. I'm not your, I've been scolded for doing stuff like that. So I'm glad that your husband's more receptive. But for date night, typically, well, we used to, before the coronavirus, one time a month, a week. And we have we always go to a different place around town. We have our favorite restaurant, so we'll try one new one. But lately, due to the coronavirus and everything being shut down, we had to get a little creative. And what we'll do is it's always when we have nothing the next day or something that's not pending, and we'll go around walking around a park, or we'll take a drive to a different part. Obviously, living in Miami, we're along the coast, so we have like one side that we can't completely go. But, we'll take all the way down to the Keys or to Naples, and we'll just go for a drive. It's mostly just alone time. And I appreciate.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I actually appreciate that question. But, with the 5 positive encounters to 1 negative encounter, this isn't something that was, obviously it was written about, but there's been studies done that show how the more positive encounters to negative encounters, the more chances a relationship has to last. And developing those positive encounters is there's so many variables involved, and some that come right off the bat are difficult sometimes to actually practice because they require you to not force your beliefs onto somebody else. And when giving perspective, it's not being so brute about it. It's actually saying something like, hey, I think that's a good idea, but let's try it this way. Instead of saying that's not going to work, you always think of something that doesn't work. That's a negative encounter. You have enough of negative encounters, then the divorce rate obviously comes in. Have you had any experience with your practice now in seeing this correlation among your clients?
Yes, it makes me think of, again, John Gottman, and how in his research, he can predict just by watching a couple interact with like 80%, 90% accuracy, whether or not that couple will stay together. And he talks about the Four Horsemen. I don't know if I can list them all, but I know one of them is contempt, defensiveness. And so if I see, you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. If I see a lot of those in just a couple, like in the first session, if I see a lot of that, that lets me know kind of that's when I'm assessing the couple, and it lets me know if I see a lot of defensiveness or contempt, like eye rolling, and criticism. I think that's another one. If I see a lot of that, I know that if we don't change that, we will, not be successful with therapy.
And how do you work with couples regarding that? Because with me, most of my work is with adolescents. Sometimes it is with adults, and the times it is with adults, it tends to be more of a one-on-one basis. And I'm not sure about you, but there are times when working with these adults that I will bring the spouse over and we'll have conversations as to what's going on in their lifestyle. Unfortunately, since I work for an agency, I'm in the process of getting my license. To meet the criteria to receive treatment, there has to be some sort of substance use involved. And then there's a secondary mental health component, and whatever's incorporated within that, I'll work with them. But I'll see oftentimes we have to work on lifestyle changes within the couple and the patterns they formed. And most of the times it's unhealthy patterns. And once those patterns are adjusted, then you see their relationships all of a sudden start growing. So what are some of the strategies you use when working with couples? And I'm sorry, I remember you said that you're a licensed clinical social worker and a licensed counselor. So do you get even a lot of couples coming in for therapy?
Yeah, not as much as I would like. That's one of my, I guess, secondary specialties. So I specialize in addiction and trauma work, and then also couples. And I didn't realize I had a passion and a love for couples work until I got into the field and actually started working. And I realized that I had a passion for relationships because my parents gave me a terrible example of a healthy relationship. They were both alcoholics. And then they divorced when I was 7. And so it was always fascinating to me to look at couples or at relationships and see them working. And I was just like, how does this happen? Like, I don't know. I know what definitely doesn't work or what an unhealthy relationship looks like, but then what does a healthy relationship look like? And so I did a ton of like personal research, reading lots of books, trying to figure out like, how can I have a healthy relationship? And then through that, I realized I really wanted to help other people find that as well. And I also really love group work. That's what I got started in, was working in an agency treating substance use. And I love the group dynamic and helping people connect and foster relationships. And so working with couples kind of reminds me of that work. I see probably maybe 4 or 5 couples right now in a caseload of about 40. So it's not as extensive as I'd like it to be, but the ones that I do see, I just absolutely love working with them. And I can't remember what your other question was about
No, oh my gosh. First off, let me tell you, I just noticed your hairstyle, so I dig it. Very nice, very
Thank
creative.
you.
And
Thanks.
the second thing is a caseload of 40. Holy cow! And that's in your private practice, I'm assuming. That's a lot of cases. Actually, I think it was actually a year and a half ago now. There was an article. I get articles from the American Counseling Association. I'm a member, and they said that a healthy caseload is anywhere between 25 to 30. Now, 40 is a lot. Do you see all these? But when they talked about it, American Counseling Association, they said that these were weekly cases. Are all these cases of yours weekly, or some of them are bi-weekly or every 3 weeks?
Yeah, some of them are bi-weekly and monthly or every 3 weeks clients. So I see between 18 and 22 sessions per week, which is a much healthier caseload. If I was seeing 40 people a week, we wouldn't be having this podcast.
That's what I figured, and I'm sure your family would also pay the price. And you seem like a really nice person who knows your stuff, who cares not only about yourself but about your family and your kid. And
Yes.
you, without realizing it, are an expert at managing your time and using your time wisely, and fully
Thank
focusing
you.
yourself on what you're doing, because to actually juggle that many things of that significant importance, it requires some skill and some management of yourself as well. In working with addiction, people oftentimes think that's, oh yeah, someone is struggling with addiction, stick them in a treatment center and all of a sudden they're going to get better, and they expect sometimes the therapist to work miracles. And that doesn't, and we both know that doesn't really work like that. And
Yeah.
I get cases like that all the time where the expectations is so high, and the other person, whether it's the other partner or the parent or people associated with that individual, don't realize that they themselves are going to have to put in the work as much as the client and as much as the therapist. And I'm sorry I'm bringing this up, but this is fairly fresh in my mind because this happened yesterday, where
Yeah.
I had to tell a parent that it's much more than the client going to therapy one time a week in an outpatient setting. I need the parent to also put in their work. They were struggling keeping up with the plan that I created for the parent, as in, if the child disobeys one of the rules that we constructed on the contract, the parent is forced to give them a consequence. And it seems like sometimes people associated with the individual in treatment don't want to put in the work. Have you had any experience with this, and how do you go about it?
100% I have. Yes. I find that especially with adolescents, it's really, really challenging because parents are often part of the problem. They have contributed in some way to the individual's how to where they are, by enabling them, by not setting appropriate boundaries, by not following through with consequences, etc. And so it's really hard to do therapy with a person who then goes back to an environment that isn't changing. And so I really try to get the parents on board. I immediately will, if an adolescent or even an adult really has an addiction problem, I will try to get the buy-in of the family member or the spouse and invite them to come to some therapy sessions and do some family work, because addiction, and I'm sure that there's some components of this in mental illness as well, is a family disease. So the addict can't survive if the family is healthy. The addiction itself cannot survive if the family is healthy. And so it's really hard to treat addiction in a isolated way.
In
We've
a
got
one
to treat the
dimension,
whole.
yeah, I'm so sorry to in a one-dimensional format. And you're
Yes.
absolutely right, because the social support an individual has is directly correlated with sobriety and recovery. And
Yes.
talking about recovery, you mentioned earlier on, I'm sorry I didn't catch it right there at that moment, but that you're technically in recovery, and so is your husband. On date nights, that means you guys have to watch what you consume, or how does that work?
Yeah, we are totally sober people. We don't consume any alcohol or substances. And so on date nights, because we're pretty far along in our recovery, both of us have been sober since December of 2012. We don't have to really change anything. We don't really go to bars unless there's music playing. But if we go to a restaurant, we just don't order alcohol, and it's not really a problem anymore because we are, actively working a recovery program, and we have the support that you mentioned.
No, that's kind of cool that you guys actually support each other. That's the best way to go about it, because sometimes if one person's using and the other one's in recovery, that oftentimes doesn't go too well, and we both know that. So all kudos to you. Kudos to you. So, we talked about relationships. We've talked a little bit about addiction. And right now there's, over the last, I say 5 years, there's been a big spike in the field involving mindfulness, right? That word's, all these words, I feel like the whole world, I feel like the whole world is always on a roller coaster. Something gets put out there and everybody rides the train, and it's a global thing now with social media, right? And so, with mindfulness, do you incorporate any of that into your practice? And, once again, that word's being thrown out there a lot. And to me, mindfulness is synonymous with consciousness. So when someone says, I'm taking a more mindful approach in my life, what I'm thinking is that they're saying is, I'm taking a more conscious effort in my life to realize what's going on and what I'm doing. And it's just almost a fancy way of throwing it out there. And so do you use mindful interventions in your practice?
I do. I actually was just meeting with a client last night, and she was talking about just worrying a lot about the future. And for me, when that happens, or even just heightened anxiety, when people are talking about just, I'm really anxious, well, then I try to bring us back to the present moment, which is what I consider mindfulness to be. And I love what you said about consciousness. I think that's so true. It's like being fully conscious and present in the moment and paying attention to what's happening right now. And I actually have these cards that my husband bought me for Christmas, and they're mindfulness cards. And so when you draw one, it gives you like a tool or a way to become more mindful. And then we practice it right there in the session. We just, for example, one of the ones that she pulled was, it said straight back, soft belly. And it was talking about just breathing and having a straight back and a soft belly and paying attention to your breath and how much that can really help you be mindful. How about you?
Well, right now, when you said those words, immediately I thought, was my back straight and my breathing right? So
I know that makes me want to do that too.
Yeah, so it was unconscious there. I appreciate that, though. For me, I used to try earlier on in my internship. I think I appreciate where I work because they really let me explore my skills and my practices early on with some of my adolescent clients. I tried meditating with them. Obviously, this was the internship. I was learning what works and what doesn't. And obviously, that wasn't really the best approach. I only did it twice, and I used it with two clients because they were adolescents, and we're living in a westernized world where, they don't really see the point in it. But most of the time, what I'll do is a lifestyle assessment, and I'll make them mindful of what's happening in their life on that basis. So, for example, I have clients that they'll wake up at 11 and they'll go to sleep at 2 a.m, right? Especially now during summer. And they'll complain saying that they're having trouble sleeping. And I'll tell them, okay, you're having trouble sleeping, but you're waking up at 11 and you're going to sleep at 2 a.m. And so you've been doing this now for a week or a week and a half. How do you expect to go to sleep early? So what I'll tell them is, I'll make them mindful of that, and I'll help them out by, if they can't come up with it on their own right there in the therapy session, I'll try saying, okay, tomorrow, do the same routine, but wake up at 6. You'll lack some sleep time, but at least you'll start getting yourself back on track. And most of the mindful practices I do, obviously I had to learn. It went all the way from meditating with my clients during the internship, trying, and noticing that's not going to work. That's only in the books, to actually trying to look at their lifestyle. So almost making them aware of what they're doing in their life to see if they want to change. But this kind of goes with what I was talking about earlier. The biggest component in therapy is the individual that comes in to see you, Leslie, that they want to make progress in their life. And sometimes I get clients that are on probation, or they're mandated to go to treatment. And it becomes really tough because the biggest component of therapy, of them wanting help, isn't always there in the beginning. And once they start seeing that I have their best interest in mind, they start always opening up more. They start having a good face when they see me. And and that's here in Miami. Obviously, the crime rate has gone down, but then went back up during the coronavirus pandemic, and it backtracked everything. I'm not sure how it is in Indiana, though. Do you ever have to see like mandated clients?
Yeah, I do. It's not as common in private practice. Usually, most of the time, people are willing and ready to meet with me at the private practice level, especially because they're paying for it. So I think sometimes when people are in treatment, or they have to do some, an alcohol education class or something, and they're not as invested in the therapeutic process. But I'm glad you brought up the stages of change, because I think that you had mentioned that earlier. And I love utilizing that and just basically educating folks on those stages of change, and then helping them see where they are. And one of my favorite motivational interviewing questions is, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is you're completely ready to change, and 1 is you're not even thinking about it. Where are you on the scale? And then they'll say, if 10 is like sobriety, ready to get sober, and 1 is like, I want to keep using forever. If they say 5, I'll say, okay, great. Why are you a 5 and not a 4? And then they will argue. Basically, it gets them to argue with me, toward making the change. Does that make sense?
Actually, that's good. And I might have to use that one, because typically what I'll do is I'll present them the stages of change, on a piece of paper, and then I'll ask them, where do you think you are on here? But that one's actually really good, because you start from the bottom and you give them from 1 to 10. And I like that approach. I might have to steal that approach from you. And thanks for that one. I really do appreciate it. So in Indiana, you're from there, and you said you're Minneapolis, right?
It's Indianapolis.
Indianapolis. I'm so sorry about that.
Okay.
What type of population do you typically work in? Obviously down here in South Florida, it's a very diverse melting pot. The U.S. in general is a very diverse melting pot. But when I think of Indiana, I think of very, very American. What type of population do you really work with there?
Yeah. When you say very American, you mean like white Anglo-Saxon, like the WASPs? Yes. Is that what you mean?
I wasn't trying to insult you or anything. That's why.
No, I'm not offended at all. It's definitely the town that I'm in is a suburb. And so it's not as diverse as if I were working in the inner city. So I see a lot of wealthy white folks, honestly. And it's interesting you bring that up, because given the social justice movement that has occurred after George Floyd's death, it sort of had me question that. I want to have a more diverse caseload and population. And so I actually have just started to put that out there in the universe, really, just to bring me whoever needs me, whether or not they can afford my fees or can or live in the area, but just how can I make myself more available to more diverse folks. And I've hired a couple of interns, actually, who they're marriage and family interns, and they will see folks at a lower cost. So that really helps us be able to provide therapy to people who can't afford the higher fees for folks like myself who are licensed and have invested a lot in training and all of that. So I don't know if that answers.
No, absolutely absolutely it does. And I'm just gonna add this to the list of things that you do. You're also an intern supervisor. Leslie, you're also an intern supervisor?
Yes, I am.
Oh my God. Dude, yo, the list keeps adding on. I might as well throw on a Superwoman costume on you, kind of, because it's like a big
I
list.
know.
It's a huge
I know.
list.
Yeah, it is. I'm a busy woman. I don't know. I finally had to tell myself, like, you're done. No more like things on the plate. You know, I had another opportunity come my way, and I was like, nope, my plate is full. I have to be, able to function as a human being.
Well, I hope the audience out there is enjoying this podcast. And I guess I'll finish it off kind of fun. And, I'll ask Leslie about her experience. Leslie, I've read, obviously, I didn't come too prepared for this interview because I have found that if I come too prepared, then all of a sudden the interview becomes unauthentic. And this has been through experience. So sorry if this interview has jumped around everywhere a little bit, or this discussion, but I guess I'll finish it fun. And there was, like I told you in the beginning, a few, type of topics that I wanted to touch on little by little, as well as I wanted to get the audience to know about you and be able to have access to you and find you. And that's sex in a relationship, right? And if you don't feel comfortable talking about this, that's fine. But I've been reading a lot of research regarding this, and it's kind of incorporated in the triangular theory of love by Robert Sternberg, because he loves triangles in all his theories. And he even talks about the importance of passion in a relationship. And I've been reading a lot of research, and I don't know how to interpret that research. And I just wanted your opinion, because I've read research that a couple that has sex one time a week reports significant means more than 5% levels of happiness, their level of happiness in the relationship. They're both reporting, it's verbally reported, that self-reported, that they're happier. And I don't know how to interpret that statistics. And if they're having sex 2 times a week, they're also even more significantly reporting more satisfaction in their relationship. And I don't know if it's that they're happy already, so they're having more sexual relationships, or the sexual relationship is contributing to their happiness. And so I just wanted to close out like that. How do you interpret those statistics?
I think it's definitely a chicken or the egg question, what came first. And it makes me think of a story I heard about. I think there's a book about it, a couple that after they had a couple of children, they realized their sex life had, really soured, and they weren't having sex very often. They just felt like they were too tired. There wasn't enough time. They would rather sleep than have sex. And so they made a commitment to have sex every day for 30 days, like hell or high water. Like, it doesn't matter if you're sick, if you don't want to, you do it anyway. And they found that after 30 days, they were more in love. They wanted to have sex more. So I think it's one of those things that I think I would interpret that research to say that the more you do it, the more you want to do it. And that it actually will, even if you don't want to, if you make an effort to, it make you feel more connected and more in love with your partner.
Thanks for that. And it just goes to show how it's not one thing or the other. It's many things simultaneously coming together to form what's in front of us. And in this case, I haven't read that statistic or that story, but it sounds like them having sex, whether, like you said, whether they wanted to or not, even though those words kind of bad, but you know what I mean? It was consensual
Mhm.
that they started connecting
Yes.
more. They started connecting more, and they explored themselves more, and they found themselves wanting to do it more, and they were happy. So it just goes to show how it's not causational. It's many things interacting with each other to form what's in front of us. And I think that's a good way to, kind of finish this podcast. I appreciate everybody listening. And Leslie, I really appreciate you taking time from your busy Superwoman schedule. I really mean it, to talk about some things in the field and just different topics in relation to what we do. And I know that you got to see clients and stuff after this. So thank you so much. Is there anything you want to say to the audience or any closing statements?
No, I just want to thank you so much for the opportunity and for the wonderful topics that you introduced. And it did bounce around a little bit, but I think that's okay. And I think that this was really fun, and I'd love to do it again sometime, or just connect in other ways. And also thank you for keeping me mindful of my crazy schedule and how much that I'm taking on, because it just reminds me to take care of myself. Like, that's so important for therapists to take care of themselves. And so I just want to thank you for that and your time.
No, thanks so much, Leslie. All right. And I appreciate the audience out there. And for more psychology content, don't hesitate to check out our YouTube channel, or if you're listening on YouTube, check out our Spotify channel, or you can find us at _Psych Life _. Take care, guys.